Hi Bart, welcome in the
Hi,
studio.
Kevin.
In this webinar, we're going to talk about cookies, not that kind of cookies, but website cookies. Again, a topic that people might think, oh, cookies again. We all have the pop-up banner now, but also in that field, a lot of things changed. Maybe let's start with repeating what it is about, what it is you need to do.
Okay, let's start by saying that cookie regulations are not about cookies.
Okay.
What the law actually says is that if you want to track people's behavior on a website or a device or in an app, no matter what technology you use to track people, you need their prior consent. Be it based on cookies or pixels or whatever, you need prior consent. Now, the main technology used on websites to track people's behavior and or to make certain aspects work is cookie-based. Hence the cookie consent, because 80% of what we do is cookie-based. So what you need is prior consent. And that has never been an issue up until 3 or 4 years ago, where there was never any audits or control by the government. But over the past few years, we have seen all through Europe that there have been a number of fines for all types of organization companies for not respecting cookie regulations. And the thing in Belgium is that the way the European Union works in data protection is that there is always a few countries that will take the lead on a certain topic and the others will follow to a bit, let's say to divide the workload. The Belgian DPA is in the lead when it comes to cookie compliance. So this is something that is for Belgian companies rather important to make sure that you apply the law correctly.
Okay, but it all starts with asking the consent, and then we have all the very annoying cookie banners and
Yes.
pop-ups and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
Where most of consumers I think just click it away to get rid of
I
it.
think that marketeers are annoyed by the extra clicks because they cost conversion. Consumers are annoyed by the eternal pop-ups that they have to get through. Nobody really reads them. I think that's changing, by the way. I think people are more
Yeah.
and more conscious of their rights and of their privacy. So there is a shift. So nobody's really happy, but for the time being, it's the best way to ensure that people have control over what companies, governments do with their data.
Okay. But even with those pop-ups and banners, there are issues because you tend to see, and it starts changing, but you tend to see a very large, big, accept all button and then very small links to decline or to modify. And even that is already a problem.
Yeah. We do cookie scans on a weekly basis together with a technical partner where we offer an integrated service, making sure that from a legal perspective, your website is okay, but also the technical function of the cookies when they are fired, when they are activated is okay. And what we see from the dozens of cookie scans we do on a yearly basis is that, and every conversation starts with, we want to do a cookie scan, but we think everything is okay, but we're going to do it anyway. But the result is always that nobody is completely compliant. There's blind spots everywhere, very often without the company knowing that there are blind spots because the problem comes from technical inaccuracies. There is the legal part where you need to get a prior consent. So you need a pop-up, you need to explain what cookies you are using. You have to categorize them in different categories, strictly necessary, the analytics, the marketing, the social media, the other cookies that are functional and that help the function of the website. You have to make sure that your cookies are in the right category and get consent per category. I have to know exactly as a visitor to your website the name of the cookies you're using, the goal of the cookies, what do they do, who's the company behind, and what is the retention time of the cookie. So you need detailed explanation on every single individual cookie, which is an issue for a lot of companies. And then from a technical perspective, we see that, for instance, analytics cookies will be put in the category of analytics, but the data is used for marketing purposes, which from a legal perspective mean that that cookie is no longer an analytics cookie, but a marketing cookie. It should have been in the other category. If I explain that to marketeers, their reply is, but if I put it in marketing, I will lose a lot of opt-ins because people don't give opt-in for marketing purposes, but sometimes they do for analytics purposes. So there's a struggle between legal and marketing and the technical people to get everything in an acceptably compliant manner on the website, which turns out to be a challenge. And a lot of, I see, for instance, a lot of websites that implement a standard cookie solution, a CMP out of the box, and they assume that it's okay. And then the first thing you notice is that if you see the cookie pop-up appear on your website on your screen as a visitor, and you do an inspection of the website of the web page at the same time, you see that consent is being asked for instance, analytics cookies, but they are already active because they were fired when landing on the website. So you're asking consent for something that you already did, which is not okay. So that type of issues are things that we keep seeing over and over and over again.
And on the buttons, it needs to be the same size.
Well,
and
then that's the basics. You need consent, you need transparency. What are the cookies doing in different categories? Consent per category. I need to know who your partners are that you're sharing the data with. So I need a list of all companies that will have access to my data based on the cookies that you're using. And in some cases on the news websites, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of intermediaries all over the world that data is shared with. It's scary to see 600.
And why is it that so many partners are displayed? Do I have the right to say, okay, this partner can't have my data?
Basically, you should have consent rights on a partner basis. Yes. Yes. That means that you have to be, because one of the things a lot of websites do is implement a standard TCF framework banner. But the TCF framework by IAB Europe is a standardized model that is easily accessible to gain consent on the use of cookies, but it works with all of those hundreds and hundreds of vendors. So without really realizing it, a lot of websites are allowing companies from all over the world to access data of the visitors on their website, which is something that you shouldn't be doing. You should look for other solutions, I think.
And at the end, you're responsible as a website owner.
At the end, there is European, there are decisions by the European Court of Justice that say that even if data is collected by third parties and third-party cookies on your website, as an owner of the website, you're responsible towards visitors of the website. So if there's any non-compliance cookie-wise or GDPR-wise, you will be liable. So there is a technical aspect, there is a transparency, and then there is indeed the how do I have to get the consent? And then there are a few basic guidelines that you have to take into account. One of the things is what you said. Basically, what the Belgian Data Protection Authority says is you need 3 buttons always. The I consent, I refuse, or I manage my choices. And if I click the I manage my choices, then I have to be able to give category by category and partner by partner consent. Those buttons, what is called no nudging. You can't manipulate people into giving consent. You can't push people to consent. That means no pre-tick boxes, but also not the big green I consent button and the very small, almost transparent I refuse. The buttons have to be same size, same font, basically same color or color scheme. You can use different colors, but they have to be equal.
Yeah.
So not the fluo green and then the very almost invisible red.
A white button.
It has to be comparable. So that is the how. The buttons have to be in the same place, in the same visibility. No pre-checking. So that is not manipulating people into giving consent. What we still see on a lot of websites is the by visiting our website, you consent. That is not okay. The consent has to be actively given. So I have to check the box. It can't be pre-checked either, but I have to check the box to say that I agree. And that is a very annoying one for a lot of people because a lot of consent management platforms, CMPs, don't from a standard default setting don't take that into account. But the Data Protection Authority considers that a given consent is valid for only 6 months. So every 6 months you should ask for consent again. That is one. But at the same time, not giving consent is something that you always also have to remember. And the I don't give consent is also valid for 6 months. So if I refuse cookies, you can't ask for consent again for the next 6 months. And you have to have a mechanism in place where after 6 months the consent is renewed or the consent is asked again, which is an issue from a technical perspective for a lot of websites.
Yeah. You started this webinar by saying it's not about cookies, and I think that's a big misconception.
That's a very big misconception.
Because a lot of the industry is going into server-side tracking, that kind of stuff, going away from all the third-party cookies. Yeah, except Google then, who is announcing that they stick to it.
Yeah. Well, there is a shift. We get a lot of questions on server-side tracking. And the shift was I think started by two things. That is the outphasing of third-party cookies, which is now probably coming to an end, at least from Google's perspective. We'll talk about that in a few seconds, I think. But also the need to get consent, the cookie pop-up, where a lot of marketeers start from the idea that, okay, so I need consent for cookies. Let's not work with cookies. Let's find another solution so that we can skip the consent, which is a mistake. Cookie consent is not about cookies. It's about, actually, it should be called tracking consent, where if you want to access data on a visitor's website, no matter what data, no matter why you access it, and no matter how you do it, any old technology, before accessing the data, you need prior consent, which means that server-side tracking, which means that the use of pixels, for instance, which means that HTML5 coding that will allow you to track people using any type of identifier always needs prior consent. And the issue is that the CMPs on the market, the cookie consent management platforms, they're exactly that. They're cookie consent management platforms. So if you want to shift to any other technology, that almost by default means that you have to start doing in-house development to create consent management pop-ups.
Yeah.
To get the consent, because out of the box you'll hardly find anything that allows you to do that. From a consumer perspective, I think that cookies are an annoyance for a lot of people, but at least they have the advantage of being transparent. If you give me a pop-up asking for permission to use cookies and I give or refuse the consent, I can always check in the settings of my browser what cookies have been accepted. I can do an inspection of the page and see what cookies have been fired. So as a consumer, I am more or less in control. I'm not in control of what you will do with the data that you collect. That's something different. But at least I know what cookies are being used. If you shift to server-side tracking, I lose, as a consumer, I lose on transparency. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you're tracking. I don't know what data you're collecting. So that's a step backwards, I think. That being said, the entire problem of still needing to get the consent is a reason for a lot of companies to forget about the entire server-side tracking idea. Yeah. Because it's just too complicated and too cumbersome, and it's easier to use cookies when it comes to tracking, analytics, and marketing tracking, at least.
Yeah, and there was a Google story. What's that about?
There was a Google story. No, it's not really a Google story. It's a general story where part of the bad reputation of cookies is created by third-party cookies. You've got the first-party cookies, which are generated and controlled by the website itself, and there are the third-party cookies that are by third-party service providers.
Typically by advertising, for example, adding additional cookies. Yeah. Sometimes even the website owner not knowing, should, but
or knowing but not realizing that data is shared. Those are typically the LinkedIn, Facebook, Google cookies, Hotjar, or that kind of services as well.
And a lot of e-commerce websites have the Facebook cookies and so on their website to be able to track conversion for their online marketing campaigns. But that means by default that you're giving access
that you're sharing data with Facebook, and a lot of that's that's where the cookie scan is useful, I think, because what GDPR requires you, this is no longer pure a cookie question, but a GDPR question, because you're sharing data, personal data. What GDPR requires is that you know at every time, at every given moment, exactly what data you are sharing and who you're sharing it with. So you need control over what happens on your website. And those third-party cookies, there has been in the past, let's call it abuse, where a lot of data has been collected and shared under the radar, up until a point where the governments, European Commission also, was on the way to enforce new regulations to put a stop to that, which created a reaction with the big providers of browsers, Google, Apple, and Firefox, or Mozilla behind Firefox, where the offense is usually the best defense. So instead of waiting for new regulations, they started to implement their own decisions, where they said that we will phase out those third-party cookies, they will disappear. We will stop, which would have had... Apple already did so. Firefox, Mozilla is also well on the way. Google was going to phase them out right now. They were doing tests in a few countries with a number of users, and third-party cookies were going to disappear completely, which would have had a very big impact, I think, on the online ecosystem, because...
And Google itself.
And Google itself. Well, the thing is, Google always presented that as we will enforce people's or strengthen people's privacy by phasing out third-party cookies. We do it for the users, we do it for the people on the internet, we do it for consumers. But if you look at things from a few steps back, Google was doing it for themselves, because those third-party cookies allow data collection. They allow to build up databases that you can use for marketing purposes. If that is no longer possible, then you need to get the data where the data is. And who is the only party that still has the data in a world without third-party cookies? That is Google, of course. And they would get a monopoly in online advertising, which is the reason, by the way, why in the United Kingdom a few months ago there was an investigation opened by not by the data protection authorities, but by the competition authorities, into the consequences of Google ending third-party cookies, which would give them a way too big control over the online marketing market. And it is that investigation that led to the decision by Google last week to put an end to the end of third-party cookies. In other words, to not end the use of third-party cookies, because they would run into enormous competition fines, because they would get a monopoly on the online data market. That is what happens, and that has as a consequence that third-party cookies will be around for a lot longer, at least in the Google ecosystem, which is a good thing for consumers, because it gives more transparency, I think, because if those third-party cookies disappear, then we will get the shift to cookieless that we discussed before, which is a lot less transparent. But the thing is, of course, that a lot of companies have already started working on cookieless solutions. What we've seen over the past few years is that media groups, for instance, have worked on a lot more gated content, where you have to create an account to gain access. While giving access, or while creating the account, you will also accept tracking. And within your account, newspapers or television corporations can collect a lot of data that they can then use for their own marketing purposes. So that shift was already on the way, which means that this recent decision to not phase out third-party cookies I don't know. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, or where it will lead to. The market is on the way to other technical solutions. The reason why Google did a step back is purely because they were afraid of the fines. So I don't know what the impact is, but third-party cookies will be around for a bit longer.
But I think for most of our viewers, a good time to check at least how their cookie banner system is working, and to really look into whether they're asking the right permissions, also if it is server-side tracking.
Ask for consent everywhere and always. Ask for the right consent. And the right consent also means that I don't only need to know that you are using cookies or server-side tracking, I also, under GDPR, need to know what you will be doing with the data that you collect. So transparency on, we will use your online behavior to send you personalized advertisements or to personalize our website or whatever. Transparency in a comprehensible way for consumers. Make sure that you respect people's choices. If they don't consent, you don't fire the cookie, which requires a cookie scan, a cookie check. Know that you have to periodically ask for consent again, 6 months basically. Also know that if people refuse, and my bank used to do that every time I wanted to log into my home bank application, and I won't mention the name of the bank. Every time again, they asked for consent on the use of marketing cookies. Every time I refused, and every time they asked the question again. That is not how cookie consent works. If I refuse consent, then you have to know that I refused, and you can have a cookie that stores the refusal. That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, you need to know somehow.
But you have to respect the no as well. And the only cookies that don't require consent are those that you can justify that are absolutely, technically speaking, necessary to be able to provide the service, the access to the website. So load balancing or security or
some login mechanism if you have an account.
Yeah, but all the rest requires consent.
Okay. Thank you, Bart, for all the insights on
You're
cookies.
welcome.
And you at home, thank you for watching. I hope to see you in the next webinar.